Hello, class, and welcome back to our review of the poems for today and the sample student essay, Shakespeare Defines Love. But before we get there, let's take a look at the Robert Herrick poem, To the Virgins to Make Much of Time. Now, again, we are constantly thinking about the human experience and life. And when we think about the idea of virginity, I can't help but think of double standards and things of that nature when we're looking at cultural expectations of both men and women, and this idea that masculinity and machismo and that's present, if you would, and celebrated in multiple sexual partners. It's very interesting when you think about it. So when we look at this poem here, right, what is it saying about promiscuity per se? And when you think about the setting, it was written in the 16th century. So again, when you think of milieu, the social and political context, what do we learn about life then, and how can it help us to better understand certain themes now, presently? So obviously, I think Sonnet 73, the poem we just discussed, just went over, is focusing more on this idea of appreciating, right, someone because they could be taken away at any time, right? And appreciation in relationships. Whereas this poem, on the other hand, people have been trying to persuade people to engage in romantic contact with them for years. And this is just decades, centuries, forever. And this is just another example. So the question is, what do you make of this argument? And let's think about it from multiple perspectives, from a dialectical approach and a Rogerian strategy approach, not just from the point of view of the speaker, but from the possible listeners. And as we evaluate the poem and analyze the poem, what possible themes are present? Obviously, to the virgins to make much of time, virginity, procreation. The idea to the virgins, are they the listeners of the from the speaker? Again, this idea of point of view and speaker and listener. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. Now, if you look at stanza one, right, they're all the lines, the first two lines are traditionally end stopped, but line three has an enjambment, so it builds the anticipation that those flowers that smile today will be dying tomorrow. Personification, right? Giving the flowers human characteristics as they're smiling. So why would they be smiling? Why wouldn't they be smiling? Again, the glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer he's to setting. So now this notion of time is being brought in. You'll also notice we have an enjambment on line 5. I'm sorry, excuse me, a caesura on line 5. The comma emphasizing that the lamp of heaven is the sun. Interesting imagery. The higher he's a getting, normal end stop, the sooner will his race be run. Interesting idea. And nearer he's to setting, rhyme. Every other line is rhyming, so we see that kind of in the stanzas and the form of the stanzas. On to stanza 3, line 10. That age is best, I'm sorry, line 9, excuse me. That age is best which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer, but being spent the worse, and worst times still succeed the former. You'll notice the enjambment after spent, right, in line 11, the third line of the stanza, enjambment after worse, right? I'm sorry, enjambment at the end of line 11. Forgive me again. And caesuras. The caesuras are the commas in the middle of the lines. There's a comma, but being spent, comma, the worst, comma, and worst times still succeed the former. Notice that emphasis with those pauses in the middle of the line, and then the enjambment causes it to spill over to the final line of the stanza. times still succeed the former. Interesting thought. Then be not coy, but use your time, and while ye may go marry, for having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. So again, we have a carpe diem poem here. This idea of seizing the moment, this notion of youth and passion and romance, and if you look at that last stanza, right, we've got the caesura, then be not coy. Coy is kind of when someone's pretending to be shy, but use your time, again, back to the theme of time. And while you may go marry, and obviously part of marriage is procreation, for having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. Now, let's kind of think about Ophelia's situation and the double standards placed upon women, right? Why does a girl have to remain a virgin? Remember, her brother and her father both caution her to not have sex with Hamlet before marriage, right? Again, we have these interesting double standards, and you can not only do we learn how women were expected to act back then, but we can also relate it to modern society, right? And look at these poems. Look at Ophelia's situation from a feminist perspective. Why does a woman need a man, right? Why does a woman have to marry, right? From an LGBTQIA perspective, why aren't there other gender partners even a possibility? The possibility, right? A queer theorist might look at Ophelia and say, why isn't even the possibility of her being with a woman, right? An option. So again, we've got a lot to think about, and as we kind of explicated the poems, as you're going through it, analyze those elements of poetry and the elements of fiction to help prove your point about the theme, much like you did in your analysis essay of the story of an hour. And the sample student essay, as you can see on page 112, if you want to take a look at it with me, the student's claim is that Sonnet 116, right, creates a more realistic image of love. You see the thesis towards the end of the intro paragraph. Remember, I suggest for your essays that your intro paragraphs do three things: provide background on your subject, right, your theme, your poem, or your themes. So Sonnet 117 is about love, right? You'll notice the sample student essay has multiple sentences kind of giving you background on love poems, and kind of bringing this notion of anyone who's been in love, kind of evoking ethos, right? But his claim, the writer's claim, Patrick McCorkle, is that Shakespeare sonnet creates a more realistic image of love. Okay, there's his thesis. Now, how's he going to prove it? By balancing negative with positive images and language. This sonnet does a far better job than thousands of songs and poems before and since, defining love in all its complexities and contradictions. So they're going to look at images, language, complexities, contradictions, right? Images, imagery. Language is part of style, right? Complexities and contradictions, right? Theme, plot, maybe symbols as well with the imagery. So again, you don't necessarily have to list out the elements of fiction as they're listed in the book, or the elements of poetry as they're listed in the book. You can use synonyms. So instead of saying imagery and style, right, positive images and language. Try to be more specific about what aspect of the elements you're going to focus on. So not only is this an excellent example of an intro paragraph, but notice how each of the body paragraphs start with a topic sentence that lets you know which aspect of the elements of fiction and poetry the paragraph is going to focus on to develop the idea. Just as I tell you, what are the three things you should always have in your paragraphs? Facts, right? Specific examples, and quotes with proper citations. Notice how all of these body paragraphs are well developed with facts, specific examples, quotations, right? And then each of the body paragraphs, right, kind of concludes with a transitional sentence, which looks ahead to the next paragraph, or a conclusionary sentence, right? A summary, if you would, of the main idea of that paragraph. You don't always have to transition, right? You might just want to wrap that paragraph up and then have your topic sentence of the following paragraph act as a topic sentence and a transition at the same time. So, that being said, as you read through this essay, I hope you're recognizing how the topic sentences are working well, how the details help support the claim, right? And how the transitions give the essay a sense of coherence and flow. Last, I'd just like to take a look at the conclusion paragraph, right? What should your conclusion paragraphs do? Repeat, review, and reflect, right? Repeat the point, right? How does Shakespeare create a more realistic image of love, right? Review how the images and the language help support that point. And then most importantly in the conclusion, reflect on the human experience. What do we learn about life? Why is it important to read and write about this piece of literature? Though more than 400 years have passed since Shakespeare wrote his sonnets, some things never change, and among these is the nature of complex human emotions. In a mere 14 lines, Shakespeare succeeds where many others have failed through the years, providing a much more satisfying definition of love than one normally sees in one-dimensional, strictly happy or sad poetry. The love he describes is the sort that not everyone is lucky enough to find. A marriage of true minds, complicated, unsettling, and very real. Right? What is the more realistic image of love that he presents? A more complicated, unsettling, and real one. How did the student provide it? By analyzing the language and imagery. And notice how they have the reflection on the theme of love to start the conclusion paragraph. So, make sure you repeat, review, and reflect in your conclusion paragraphs so the overall emphasis of the essay is clear to your readers. Just as when we analyze a poem or a story, you want to consider the title, the first lines, and the last lines. Try to really focus on starting your essays with a clear purpose, right, and ending your essays fulfilling those purposes. Right? So keep up the great work. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching and listening. And until next time.